From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I am Soini Gray. Israeli security forces have killed at least 55 Palestinians after firing on unarmed protesters assembled along the border with Israel with live ammunition. Almost 2,500 Palestinians have been injured so far. Israeli forces are also using drones to drop tear gas shells on demonstrators. Tens of thousands of Palestinians gathered across the frontier with Israel and have intensified their protests against the opening of the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. The protest also comes ahead of the annual commemoration of the Nakba, or catastrophe, when the State of Israel was established on May 15, 1948, in a violent campaign that led to the expulsion of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians from their villages. And the Palestinian ambassador to the United Nations, Riyad Mansour, has called for an emergency meeting of the Security Council within the next 24 hours following the killings. He called the massacre a war crime and said it was a tragic day for Palestinians. Mansour also said he believes an independent investigation should be carried out by the Security Council on the basis of human rights violations. He also confirmed that at least 8 children under the age of 16 were among those killed. And the United Nations Human Rights Office tweeted that the shocking killing of dozens and injury of hundreds by Israeli live fire in Gaza must stop now. The right to life must be respected, and that those responsible for outrageous human rights violations must be held to account. The international community needs to ensure justice for victims. And the Venezuelan Minister of Foreign Affairs, Jorge Arreaza, has tweeted expressing his nation's rejection of Israel's violent suppression of Palestinian protests. Arreaza wrote, Venezuela expresses its forceful rejection of the violent actions against the Palestinian people as an Israeli reaction to the massive march in Gaza in the protests at the arbitrary transfer of the American embassy to Israel to the city of Jerusalem. Now, despite widespread condemnation of the violent repressions, the White House has instead blamed Hamas for Israel gunning down dozens of unarmed Palestinian protesters. The White House Deputy Press Secretary Raj Shah said the responsibility for those tragic deaths rests squarely with Hamas. Hamas is intentionally and cynically provoking this response. That's his statement. And the South African government has withdrawn its ambassador to Israel following the deadly violence. In a statement, they said the South African government condemns, in the strongest terms possible, the latest act of violent aggression carried out by Israeli armed forces along the Gaza border. And Telesur correspondent Noor Harazin was at the Gaza border with Israel as protests unfolded. She sent us this report.
The Palestinians on the borderline between Gaza and Israel are trying to cross the border fence, and in some area they succeeded and they managed to enter the Palestinian occupied lands, which is now called Israel. Many, when we were talking to the protesters, many have said that the borders of Israel are not internationally recognized, therefore they are not to be respected, and that the Palestinian people will keep on protesting day after day until they get their right of return. The numbers of death is going very, very high. However, the Palestinian people said that they will get their rights even if they got killed trying. Here in the Gaza Strip, the Palestinian people are making history and sending a clear message to the international community and to the whole world that they have reached a point where there is no coming back, and that they need a real solution for the Palestinian cause, and they need to get their rights as human beings.
We thank Noor for that report. The U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem is now officially open, despite worldwide condemnation. The Secretary General of the Palestinian Liberation Organization has called it a new settlement. The inauguration ceremony was attended to by the daughter of the U.S. President, Ivanka Trump, who was accompanied by her husband, Jared Kushner, who who is an advisor to the president. Addressing the massacre, Kushner told the crowd at the opening that the protesters were, quote, provoking violence and part of the problem. Many foreign dignitaries were invited to the ceremony, but most European ambassadors opted to boycott the event. And a senior Hamas leader, Khalil al-Hayya, has denounced the, quote, crime of moving the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem while at the Gaza border with Israel.
The moving of the U.S. embassy in this unjustified, aggressive way to our land, to Jerusalem, the eternal capital of Palestine, is a crime. Our nation has been protesting today in response to this new American Zionist aggression. They are showing the world with their bodies and their blood.
And thousands of protesters have taken to the streets of central Istanbul in Turkey. They denounced both the opening of the U.S. embassy in Jerusalem and Israel's massacre of Palestinian protesters. The crowd carried Palestinian flags as well as anti-United States and anti-Israeli banners, and chanting slogans marched through the city to Taksim Square. For more on today's events in Palestine, we go live now to Max Blumenthal. Max is a best-selling writer and political commentator who has written extensively on Palestine and Israel. He's the author of the 2013 book, Goliath, Life and Loathing in Greater Israel. Max, thank you for joining us. What do you make of the mainstream media's response to today's events? As a journalist, would you describe the gunning down of dozens of unarmed protesters as clashes?
Well, it's not just describing it as clashes. It's the use of the passive voice, which is practically the editorial standard for American corporate media. And so we see CNN with a headline noting that Palestinians died in Gaza. How did they die? Maybe they got old or they were sick. Who's going to solve the mystery behind these deaths? We just don't know how they died because the headline just says they up and died. And so what we have to state clearly is that Israel carried out these killings in deliberate fashion. Israel has an open fire shoot to kill policy where they're not actually shooting at even the extremities of protesters. They're aiming for the torsos and the heads. And we've seen this footage on Twitter. We've seen it on social media. We're not seeing it in the U.S. media the same way that White Helmet's footage from Syria was played on a virtual feedback loop for the last 2 years to induce the U.S. bombing of Syria. And we know why.
Now, Max, both the White House and Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, have blamed Hamas for those killings. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you know, along with, I'm releasing a documentary tonight called Killing Gaza. You can watch it on demand at killinggaza.com. It's really 3 years in the making and comprises about a year of filming along with my co-producer Dan Cohen inside Gaza. And Dan actually filmed protests in 2015 that were much like the kind today that were actually broken up by Hamas. Hamas wouldn't allow these protests for years. These protests represent the will and the agency of people in Gaza who've been under siege for 10 years and who've been dispossessed for 70 years now. And so what Hamas has simply done is allow people to carry out their will and ventilate their frustration and misery with being kept in what can only be described as an open-air prison.
Now, you were just talking about your documentary, Killing Gaza. So you were in Palestine for a bit. What is the mood there to the response to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem?
Well, the move really represents pouring salt and tear gas on an open Palestinian wound, and it was timed for Nakba Day. I mean, the timing could not be a bigger insult to Palestinians as they observe the 70th anniversary of their ethnic cleansing and dispossession by Israel in 1948. I can only assume this was deliberate. You look at the cast of characters in the U.S. delegation: Jared Kushner, who's the chair of a family foundation that supports the Israeli settlements; David Friedman, the U.S. ambassador, also the chair of a foundation that supports an illegal Jews-only settlement in the West Bank. These figures really represent the U.S. desire to make permanent the Israeli project of colonization. And I think Palestinians have to realize, and they do, that the idea of Palestinian statehood in the current reality is a fantasy. They are going to have to mobilize a different kind of struggle representing the one-state reality.
Now, Max, thank you so much for chatting with us. Really quickly, can you remind us how we can see your documentary, Killing Gaza?
Thank you. It's killinggaza.com. It will be live tonight.
So we've been talking to Max Blumenthal. Max is a best-selling author and political commentator who has written and visited extensively in Gaza and the West Strip. Thank you so much, Max, for talking to us.
Thanks for having me on.
Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro continued his campaign today in the state of Táchira. With 6 days until the election, the leader called on all Venezuelans to exercise their right to vote. Maduro said that Venezuela must be strengthened from the inside, beginning at the grassroots level of communal councils and the local communities for committees actually for supply and production, which is known as the club. So let's take a closer look at how the campaigning is playing out.
The candidates continue with their intense agendas to gain last votes ahead of election. President and candidate Nicolás Maduro visited the states of Apure and Aragua. He asked people to get ready for a great victory in the name of sovereignty and national dignity.
Where is the president elected? In Washington or in San Fernando de Apure? In Miami or in Apure? In Bogotá or in Venezuela? So I tell the North American imperialists that on May 20, the people of Venezuela will elect the president of the Bolivarian Republic.
On Saturday, there were several demonstrations in Caracas to support Maduro's candidacy. One of them, led by young people, was in the Rómulo Gallegos Avenue.
We support Maduro to rescue this country, to avoid people from leaving Venezuela, and to continue following what Commander Chavez once said: unity, fight, battle, and victory. This is what we want on May 20, to have a resounding victory.
Here we are with our president, Nicolás Maduro. On May 20, we will win with our president.
In the meantime, opposition candidate Henry Falcón also continued his tour across the country. On Saturday, he visited the states of Zulia and Portuguesa and published his activity on his Twitter account. The other opposition candidate, Javier Bertucci, announced that he will not renounce to his candidacy in favor of Falcón. He also visited the areas of Catia, El Valle, and Petare in Caracas, where he distributed his popular soups among the attendees. He also gave a speech advocating to the hope for a change and better future for the country.
And the Bolivian president, Evo Morales, continues to voice concern over foreign attempts to intervene in Venezuela by the U.S. and its allies. In a tweet, Morales referred to claims by Argentinian journalist Stella Cayoni, who said that a master blow by the United States is underway against the government of Nicolas Maduro. Morales said that Bolivia rejects plans to militarily intervene in Venezuela. Meanwhile, the so-called Lima Group are meeting in Mexico and have denounced Venezuela's elections. They have called for the international community to intervene and called on the government to suspend Sunday's votes. And the president of Venezuela's National Electoral Council, Tibisay Lucena, today provided an update on the elections. She said that all audits have been carried out with the supervision of the political parties participating in the presidential race. International delegations accompanying the elections will begin to arrive on Tuesday, with the official inauguration taking place on Thursday. And our correspondent Ian Bruce is in Caracas. He has the details of the most recent audit of the voting system by the National Electoral Council.
We're outside the warehouse of the CNE, the National Electoral Council in Marichi on the outskirts of Caracas, where today they're holding another audit or verification of the voting system. This is the 6th of 10 audits carried out before voting day. This one is called the Zero Error or Pre-Dispatch Audit, where they're testing portion of the machines that will be used on the voting day. 0.5%, 169 machines of the more than 30,000 that will be deployed on for the vote itself on Sunday. And the aim here is to test the sequence from the voting machine, the transmission lines, to the computing center where the votes are added up, to make sure there's absolutely no chance of error between the information that goes into the voting machine and the information, the total votes that comes out at the end. Last week they checked the transmission lines. There are in all 10 audits before the election, more on election day and more after election day. So we'll be bringing you more on this later in the day.
Thank you so much for that report, Ian. Now, in Trinidad and Tobago, the Movement for Social Justice held a seminar on the crisis facing Venezuela on Saturday. Now, that's where the party's leader, David Abdullah, used the opportunity to speak about his experience as an election observer who was in Venezuela for governing elections last October. Also speaking at the event was the Venezuelan ambassador to Trinidad. So to discuss the summit in detail, we're being joined by Ozzy Warwick. He's the General Secretary of the MSJ. Ozzy, thank you so much for joining us. Why was it so important for the MSJ to host this summit in Trinidad, and what were some of the things that came out from your discussions on Saturday?
Thank you very much for having me this afternoon. We felt it important to have this seminar because there was a lot of disinformation being presented here in Trinidad, not just by the U.S., but in terms of even Trinidad and Tobago, certain organizations in Trinidad and Tobago. And we felt that as a progressive movement, we had a responsibility to ensure that the people of Trinidad and Tobago get the truth, the real truth about the situation in Venezuela, especially in terms of the electoral process, to show how democratic indeed it is, with David Abdullah and myself having been international observers at previous elections. But we also thought it important to put the whole situation of Venezuela into context, in the context of U.S. hegemony and the attempt by the United States to influence the Americas. We felt that it would be important to have that discussion in a very in-depth way with persons from the social movements as well as from the party.
Now, Trinidad and Venezuela continue to have fairly good diplomatic relations. Is there a concern that this relationship may be under threat?
Well, we believe that there will be pressure being placed on the Trinidad and Tobago government by the U.S. and its allies in order to weaken the support that Venezuela has from Trinidad and Tobago. Our position is that relationship should be further strengthened, and therefore we had called for Trinidad and Tobago to have more conversations with Venezuela. As you know, that recently we would have signed a very important gas deal, and we do not want to see that threatened in any way whatsoever.
Now, last week, Venezuela hosted an international meeting to discuss reparations. Leaders from across the region are expected to release a final declaration that ensures that persons of African descent can be properly compensated for centuries of enslavement. Just really briefly, what are your thoughts on the historic conference which took place last week?
Sure. I think that this is coming at an opportune time because even as we see a further aggression by the U.S. and its allies, we have to talk about the fact that slavery existed in this part of the world for almost 500 years. And it was the most brutal form of violence against any people, against humanity. It was long, it displaced persons, it was genocide, it decimated language, it decimated cultures, it decimated societies. And so we think it is very opportune that we have this very important conference. And of course, we welcome the call for reparations to be provided in order to, and if you really think about it, you could never really bring justice to a people who have been victim of this most brutal form of society.
Ozzy, it's really good talking to you. I wasn't aware that you have also served as an electoral observer in Venezuela. So expect that we're going to be talking to you more during this week as we lead up to elections on Sunday. And definitely we're going to be talking to your partner, your comrade at the MSJ, David Abdullah, as well. Thank you so much for chatting with us. We've been speaking to Ozzy Warwick. He is the General Secretary of the Movement for Social Justice in Trinidad and Tobago. They hosted a Venezuela Solidarity Conference on Saturday. Other news now, the National Liberation Army, or ELN, has announced that it will cease its military activities for the presidential election in Colombia on May 27th. The armed group said on Twitter it will hold a ceasefire from May 25th to May 29th so that the people can express their voice under more favorable conditions. The ELN also warned that some of the country's right-wing groups will try to fight against the changes Colombia needs. And still in Colombia, over 600 people have been affected by floods near the Cauca River in the department of Antioquia. The floods were reportedly caused by the Hidroituango hydroelectric project. Authorities reported that 4 bridges were affected and another 1 collapsed, making it very difficult for emergency services to reach the area. Firefighters, members of the Red Cross and the Civil Defense Unit continue to work in the affected area. And in Argentina, people have taken to the streets to protest against the increase in the prices of water, gas and light. Our correspondent, Ageru Esteban, brings us the latest.
A huge demonstration called by the General Confederation of Labor has taken place in the capital city of Buenos Aires. There are 2 main reasons for the protest. The first one, the increase of light, water and gas tariffs, a topic that is being discussed in the National Congress, where they will find an alternative in order to stop the increase of the tariffs. The majority of the population cannot afford them. And also, the possible agreement with the IMF, which has concerned the people of Argentina. Workers have confirmed that if the agreement is signed, they will take to the streets and a general strike will also be held. The dollar is also increasing, worrying the people of Argentina and seeing that even more of them take to the streets.
Thank you, Ageru Esteban, for that report. The Caribbean Court of Justice has ruled that the Chief Electoral Officer, and this is in Barbados, Angela Taylor, must add Professor Eddie Venturos's name to the electoral list. If she fails to do so, she will be held in contempt of court and will face sanctions. Professor Eddie Venturos was born in St. Lucia and is now a resident of Barbados. The decision was made during a live link-up between Barbados and Trinidad, where the CCJ is based. Venturos had challenged a decision by officials of the Electoral and Boundaries Commission to not place his name among those who are eligible to vote in the upcoming May 24 general elections. The final electoral list is due out on Friday. And there's another problem with the electoral list in Barbados. The media outlet Barbados Today is reporting that there are over 500 irregularities in the electoral list, most of them in 4 constituencies in the St. Michael's area. Now, these are key seats, 2 of which are currently held by Prime Minister Frondell Stewart and the political leader of the opposition Barbados Labour Party, Mia Mottley. The irregularities involve voters being named in multiple constituencies. The Electoral Boundaries Commission has responded by defending the integrity of their system. And Trinidad and Tobago's Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley is in China to strengthen ties between the 2 nations. His visit will last until Saturday. Now, the Chinese Premier Li Keqiang said Trinidad and Tobago is China's biggest trading partner among the English-speaking Caribbean. He also said China aims to enhance cooperation in areas like energy, finance, and agriculture. Now let's have a look at some other news making headlines from around the world.
A family of 5 in Indonesia have bombed police headquarters in the city of Surabaya. Attack comes a day after another family of 6 launched suicide attacks on Christians attending Sunday services at 3 churches in the same city. The 2 attacks have killed at least 25 people and wounded 40. The government has confirmed children between 8 to 18 years old were used as suicide bombers. The Islamic State has claimed responsibility for the attacks.
I want to urge everyone again, we will fight terrorism and we will eliminate the root cause of it. I have commanded the police and police chief to stand the ground and do everything to stop these terrorist acts.
Italy's anti-establishment five-star movement has joined far-right party the Northern League. Together, they are expected to present their government program to the president on Monday and name a prime minister. This comes 2 months after the general elections and weeks of unsuccessful talks to bring the political parties to create a coalition. The populist five-star movement had secured the 30% of votes, but not the right-wing alliance of Forza Italia and the Northern League, nor the centre-left Democratic Party could reach an agreement on joining forces. An Ebola outbreak in the town of Bikoro in the Democratic Republic of Congo has killed at least 18 people. Around 1 million inhabitants are at risk of contracting the virus, according to the WHO. The organization, which is trying to contain the outbreak, has said getting aid to the affected area is extremely challenging given its remoteness and lack of infrastructure.
And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at tellus4tv.net/English. You should also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Tell Us Your English, I'm Soini Gree. Thank you so much for watching.
We are always there tracking the news. We seek equality. We defend the truth. It's a hard job, but we are not alone. We count on a new ally. Passion for football has come to Telesur. Join us and enjoy all this excitement. Running to World Cup Russia 2018 from the hand of number 10. Only on Telesur, the news source from South America and the Caribbean.
Follow the most important global events through a comprehensive perspective. A team of journalists in 25 locations around the world. 3 broadcasts to convey our people's reality. From the South. Weekdays. Only on Telesur.